Okay, we're going to go ahead and start this session. I am Cindy Held. I work with the KEXAC office. I'm the Assistant Director of Communication and Development. And today, or right now, you're in the session of science projects that your students will love, presented by Peggy Shear, our Program Improvement Specialist. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to her. But first, just wanted to let you all know that I will be muting participants as they come in. And if you have a question, we do have the message function. If you're not able to see the message window, then you can unmute yourself and chime in if you have questions. But I think Peggy will probably stop here and there to take questions as well. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her and let her get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Got to unmute yourself, Peggy. Sorry.
And see, she'd muted everybody. I should have known that. Hi, everybody. Glad to have you with us today. And thank you, Cindy, for the introduction. And so I do have a PowerPoint. Cindy's going to take care of all of that stuff for me. And so we'll just run through things. The PowerPoint is just to sort of help you keep pace with what's going on. And obviously, I'll be filling in details as we go along. This session is called Easy Experiments Students Will Love, and hopefully that will be exactly what you're going to find. But it's based on the fact that we are looking for science lab-based things, and that's a new state requirement, and so we'll start with ours. So if you'll move on to the next one, Cindy. First of all, I'll tell you that as she said, I'm Peggy Shear. I taught English for 20 years at Wayne County High School, was high school principal there for 11 years, retired. They built a new residential facility just up the road from me, so I worked for 7 years at Otter Creek Academy. So with that introduction, your first thought would be, why in the world is she doing a session on science then? Since she's an English major, never taught science, why would she be doing a science session? Well, the reason I'm doing the science session is because while I was at Otter Creek, I began to realize, even before this lab-based graduation requirement came along, that our kids were not getting hands-on kinds of opportunities. We know that our kids very often are behind the 8 ball, as the saying is, about having the same kind of education that every student in the state has. And that's what we want. We want our kids to have a comparable education, because they do move around so often, because they do have issues outside of school. Not that all teenagers don't, but ours seem to have a little bit more severe problems most of the time that they have to deal with. Sometimes they don't have the same kind of educational opportunities that the rest of the students in the state have. And we need to try to make a correction in that error. So the new state standards comes from Bills 158 about graduation requirements, and now it states with this class coming in that they need to have 2 of the 3 science credits to be lab-based. And so last year we made an effort to get started in that direction, and we talked about things with science labs-based things. We did a session last year about that. We came up with some ideas. We posted some things on the website, on the KEXAC website. We did some PDs, thought we were all good to go, ready to move. And then COVID hit. And so lab-based became even more difficult, if even possible, to do with the scenario that we dealt with, that you guys dealt with last year. And so this year, I sort of wanted to reboot a little bit, to relight the fire, hopefully, that you had last year for doing some lab-based science experiments. And so that's sort of where we are today. And to sort of get you back in that frame of mind, I wanted to show you just a little bit of a video. Cindy, if you'll go ahead and cue that up. Steve Spangler, he's one of the major, I guess, icons in the science showcase world. And so we're going to look a little bit at a piece that he did on the Ellen show, just to give you an idea about the impact that it has. Now, why would Ellen have him on his show if it wasn't something that people enjoyed watching. So let's look at Steve Spangler doing a lab-based experiment.
Peggy, can you see my screen?
I can see your screen, yes.
Okay, here we go.
7 feet long, 3 feet wide, about 2 feet deep. There's 2,500 pounds of cornstarch in here. Isn't that amazing? Look at that. So now, watch this. You can just punch it, and it becomes a solid at that split second. This is really fun to do at home.
Right.
All right. So here's the theory.
Some of it isn't solid, you know, it doesn't.
So,
God,
okay,
that's
but just,
weird.
isn't that weird? So when you put pressure on it, it doesn't behave like that. So here's what I was thinking. I know you like game shows. So here's my new game show. If you could go from here to here, walking across without sinking, you don't die. All right? So kind of a different kind of game show. So,
And how much have you tested this?
not a lot.
Right.
We had a little vat of it in the back, and so.
No,
I started
seriously,
thinking,
during the commercial, he said, we have never tried this before. You just told me you've never tried this before.
Well, that's in a small scale I did, but not like this. All right, but in theory, should be great. All right, so.
This is crazy because no one has done this before. So are you spotting her?
ready?
Good.
Okay, so when you go across,
You're gonna go fast.
just go fast. Don't stop, all right? And we're gonna catch you at the very end, all right? But go, it's gonna feel weird. Just go across. Ready? Fast. Go. Now go to the middle and just go really, really fast. Ready? Go, 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 go. Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. Don't stop.
Look at yourself. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away. Watch that.
So I wanted to show you a little bit about the excitement. Obviously, you could hear the audience yelling in the background, and even the lady who did the experiment was pretty enthusiastic. She kept going back and forth that we hadn't anticipated, or that they hadn't anticipated. Cindy, if you'll go on to the next slide. So the reason I show you this is to show you that science can be fun. And that's part of why we need to do lab-based activities with our KEXAC kids. Now, first of all, we're meeting the new state requirement. That's one reason why we need to be doing science lab-based experiments. But we also have that purpose of preparing our kids for what's going to happen next. Some of our kids are going to go on to A1 schools. We want those kids to have the same background, the same knowledge in science classes as everybody else does, so that they don't feel stupid or act stupid when they get to a class that has labs and they've never done labs. They might go to an A5 school that has lab-based things. They might go to college. I'll give you an example. I know of a young man who went to a regular school, not a KEXAC school, but a regular A1 school, took the classes that he should have taken, went on to a college, and the first lab that he went to, the teacher called him out and said, "Where in the world did you go to high school? Do you not know anything about how to use a lab?" The kid was so mortified as a freshman in college in front of all of his peers that he even contemplated suicide over the fact that this teacher had called him out. We never want kids to feel defeated or feel like that we as a school have not done our due diligence in making them prepared for school. Most of our programs in KEXAC are either use textbooks or use online programs to do the chemistry or the biology, those upper level classes. And so we know that those things offer opportunities in terms of watching videos or talking about it in your textbook of things that you can do. But that's not the same as doing hands-on opportunities. I can liken it sort of to driving. I don't think any of you want to be on the road with somebody that learned how to drive by reading it in a textbook or watching a video of how you're supposed to drive. You want somebody that actually had hands-on practice. And so that's why we need to do lab-based activities with our students in our KEXAC programs. Now, I know that's a challenge. And when I talk about doing lab-based activities, you have lots of things that come to mind about she has lost her mind and thinks that we can do this in KEXAC schools. Well, as I told you, I worked for 7 years at Otter Creek Academy, which is a residential facility for girls. And we did lab-based hands-on class work. I have been to other schools this year that have done lab-based. I've seen them do it. I've talked to kids which were excited about the activities that they've done. It is doable. But let's sort of take care of some of the myths about why it is a problem. First of all, many of you are not science majors. You don't have a science degree. I don't either. But we know that almost all of our KEXAC schools are limited in terms of the number of teachers that we have. And so having a science degree is not mandatory for you to be able to do lab-based classes. First of all, you did lab-based classes in high school and in college, and you can read, you can follow directions, so you can do this. So having a science degree is not the end all of this problem. I know that many of you will say, well, I have all these kids stuck together. I have kids that are in the 6th grade and in the 8th grade in the 2nd semester, and I've got freshmen, and I've got seniors, and I've got people that are going to college. What in the world am I supposed to teach that has all of these kids together in the same place? I understand all of those issues, but it's doable. Here's the issue. There is continuity between what goes on in the science field. If a kid is, if you do a science experiment that's a biology experiment, if they're not taking biology right now, it can be an embellishment for something they've already had. It can be an acceleration for something that they haven't had. It can be a remediation of something that maybe they didn't get in the first place, but they all have commonalities. So it doesn't matter if it's not necessarily the subject that they're currently enrolled in your school, but the fact that you are covering a lab-based science experiment that these kids will hopefully remember and be able to utilize in their entire educational opportunities. So don't worry about the fact that you have all of these kids mixed together. I understand about that. I sort of talked a little bit about that next bullet about the core content. If they're in 6th grade, it's okay if they learn a little bit of biology or they learn a little bit of chemistry. If they're a senior, it won't hurt if they have already talked about that in their class somewhere. But it can be remediation, it can be acceleration, it doesn't really matter. It will be good for the students to have hands-on opportunities. Many of you are thinking, oh gosh, she thinks I'm going to let my kids dissect something. No, I don't. I don't think you're going to give them chemicals to let them blow up anything. I understand that. There are restrictions for many of our kids. I realize that. But do the things that you can do. There are millions of things that you can do that don't require kids to do things that would restrict them in your particular setting that you're in. How am I going to fit that into my schedule? I've already got 6 classes. I've got 7 classes. Where in the world am I going to put that? A couple of different ways to do that. We'll talk about some as we go along. One of my suggestions would be to do it in the period that they're taking science. If all your kids aren't taking science at the same time, then do it in groups. If you have a large school, break it up into groups. If you have a small school, do your whole small school at the same time. The time is not a big factor. Most of the labs will not take very long. Others of them will take longer, but there are things that go on that will fit in, that you can fit into your schedule. It may take a little bit of time out of their regular schedule, but it's something that they need to know, something that they need to do, something that you can figure out. Cost is obviously one of the questions that always comes to people's minds. Resources, where am I going to get these materials? Most of the things that we're going to talk about today, or pretty well all of the things that we're going to talk about today, are either free or things that you have already in your house or very minimal cost. There are some other resources that you can utilize, and I'll talk about those as we go along. But cost is not a deterrent for all of this. Many of our kids are transients. They've already had this material. They'll say, I've already done that lab. It won't hurt them to do it again. It'll be fine if things are still there. Time to prepare. That's going to be the biggie. And I know that up front. And as a result, what we've done at KEXAC is try to provide you with materials to give you a jump start on what kinds of things you can do. So I'll talk about this in more detail a little bit later. But last year during COVID, I taped little segments, little jump start segments of over 150 science experiments that you can do with your kids. Those are on the KEXAC website. On there are also directions on how much of materials that you're going to need, what materials you're going to have for that particular experiment. And then the videos will show you little segments of how to get started with some of that. So we've tried to do lots of the work for that up front for you, knowing that your time is very limited. Also today, I'm going to share a few other resources with you, and Cindy's going to tell you how she took care of that, but we're going to send some other resources to you so that you have an idea about how to jumpstart and get started with these things. So time won't be as big as an issue as you think it will be. Getting buy-in from the students. Having dealt with KEXAC students for multiple years, I understand that they sometimes say, well, I've got to earn this credit. I've got to get this credit finished. I've got these lessons I've got to have done before the end of the week. I don't want to fool with this. And we'll talk about some ways to get buy-in from your students. One being that I think they're going to find the excitement of what goes on in the lab experiment. They'll understand that it's not going to take away that much time from their other classwork. And thirdly, I would suggest that you give them some grades for what you're doing in those labs in their classes so that they have that ultimate grade reward of participation in what's going on. So my goal today is to provide some ideas and some resources to make this doable for you and accessible for your kids. Next slide, Cindy. So we talked about why, and here are some other reasons why we should be doing lab-based science with our kids. One is that it prepares our kids, and I sort of talked about that quite a bit on the previous slide. But the Kentucky Standards for Science uses the language that you see on the slide there. Scientific investigation using a variety of methods. Planning and carrying out investigations, and analyzing and interpreting data, constructing explanations and designing solutions. Now, I can almost guarantee you that if your kid is doing just online or just book classes for the science field, they are not doing lab-based things that this language specifies that they do. We have got to pick up the pace in terms of how much labs we are doing. We've got to meet the state standard. Also think about the fact that it meets the learning styles of most of our kids. Most of our kids are very tactile. They like having hands-on. They like being able to see. They're visual students. And so as a result, that helps us know why we need to be doing this. Cindy, if you'll do the next slide. Now, these next things I'm going to share with you are some suggestions about how you can get this accomplished. They are suggestions. They are not from KED. They are from Peggy Shear. But I have taught this in some of my classes, and so I know that these kinds of things will work. Suggestion in terms of time. We're looking at ways that we can expose our kids to more things, that we can provide enrichment, that we can provide advancement, that we can provide review. We are doing all sorts of different levels of educational value for these kids. The time will be worth it in the long run. My suggestion would be that once or twice a week, you do a lab with your kids. Now, don't think that that's a big production. Sometimes a lab can be a 5-minute lab. Sometimes it will be longer, but I would suggest doing 1 or 2 a week. I would do that either in class. If you have science classes that meet just the science kids all in one subject, all in one time, I'd suggest doing it with them. If you have a large school or a large class, you might break it down and do it in groups. But there's lots of ways to do that. So you can do it in class as a whole, whatever works best for you. As I said, some labs will be short, some can be much longer. But I would suggest doing at least one hands-on lab a week. And as I said, some of those can be 5 minutes. They don't have to be big deals. There are lots of videos that you can do. I wouldn't get carried away with the videos. Obviously, that again takes away from the fact that they are not hands-on, not tactile, not something that they actually can see while they're sitting there in your classroom. If you have problems, maybe your kids are on some sort of limited restrictions for a while, then maybe videos would be appropriate. Or for whatever reason, maybe you've been on a field trip that week and you're short of time, then maybe a video might be appropriate for one of your other activities during the week. But my suggestion in terms of time, how much to invest, would be to do at least one science experiment a week, and 2, in my thoughts, would be preferable. Now, how am I going to include all of that? Because there's chemistry, and there's biology, and there's physical science, and there's physics, and sometimes they overlap with each other. How in the world am I going to fit all that in? We'll talk about that a little as we go, but you do need to include parts of all of those, because science is not just one field. Don't do all biological labs, don't do all chemical labs, but do a mixture of things so that you're covering the needs of your students and their specific subjects that they're taking, or their specific subjects that they will be taking or have taken in the past. I would severely suggest that you include vocabulary, and that's one of the reasons why I try to veer you away from doing video kinds of things, is because most of the videos are not going to include any vocabulary. You notice the thing at the beginning that Steve Spangler did on the Ellen Show. There's no explanation for why that works. There's no explanation for what it's called. If any of you have ever tried the stuff that he was using, most people call that oblique. But there's no mention of that word. There's no mention of the vocabulary about surface tension. There's nothing done in terms of what you should do. Make sure that you cover the vocabulary. Make sure that you cover scientific method. Our students should not go into another school someplace else and not have a clue what the scientific method is. Now, you'll remember the scientific method from when you went to school, but we'll tell you where you can find some information about that if you've forgotten all those steps, because I certainly did when I started doing this. You do need to provide kids with an explanation for why something works or why it doesn't work. When Steve Spangler did that, obviously he did it for entertainment value on the Ellen Show, but when you're doing it for your kids, you need to do an explanation for why that works or doesn't work. The KEXAC website, where I've included things that are written for you, will give you an explanation about why those particular experiments worked and what scientific principle is involved in that. Many of the videos that you watch will not have that, but quite obviously you can Google it. You can Google anything and find an explanation for why something works. Provide your kids an opportunity to have questions, to be able to ask questions about what's going on. And and you may not know the answers. Lots of times students would ask me questions that I didn't know the answer to, but I can always Google it and come back to them with the answer the next day. But don't be afraid to let them ask questions, because that innate curiosity that they have shows their enthusiasm for the subject and will get them interested in other things as we go along and as they go along in their education. I would suggest that your students have a science notebook. And again, I know that many of your situations are different. Some of you have kids for a day or two. Some of you have kids for longer periods of time. Utilize what works best for you. But I would suggest, if you keep students for any period of time at all, that they have a science notebook. And here is my thought process. It helps them with their note-taking skills. It provides them with information that they could use for assessments. It gives them information that they could use for a reference in the classes that they are currently taking, or maybe in another subject that they're going to be taking soon. It helps them to do deeper thinking skills like analysis and prediction, and they can write those things down in their science notebook. I would suggest things like writing a date and what the lab was at the heading of their notebook on that particular page. Write down the vocabulary. Hopefully you'll put the vocabulary on the board for them so they can copy down those words. I know that spelling some of those is not in most people's range of comfort. The scientific method, they need to know that scientific method. Somewhere that needs to be in their notebook as well. And if they write a little summary, if you'll remember in high school and college, you did lab reports, and they could obviously write a little condensed version of what happened so that they will remember what's going on. If you'll go to the next slide, please, Cindy. I mentioned that I would suggest you do assessments with your kids. They could take a variety of different forms. They might be a worksheet. For instance, you might utilize a video or a real microscope and show the students the parts of the microscope, which they need to know so that they don't feel stupid when they go to another class, and do a worksheet of that. That could be an assessment. They could do a lab report. They could summarize what happened in the lab that you saw. They could do a list of the periodic, not the periodic table, the scientific method, and talk about what the prediction is that they're going to make. Will this happen or will this not happen? Or what do you think will happen when you do this? So those kinds of things would fit in a lab report type of thing. You could do a quiz on vocabulary. You could do a little quiz on the parts of something. If you're studying a butterfly, you might do a little quiz on the parts of the butterfly. You might do a little quiz on the stages of a frog. You might do a little quiz on some scientific information that you shared with them about density or about whatever it is that you're studying. But do a little short quiz about that. There are state standards, obviously, that we're trying to meet, so we need to cover those kinds of things. We all know that writing things down make them more memorable. Obviously, if you've heard things, you're listening to that thing, you write it down, you look it up when you do an assessment. I'd suggest you let them use their notes for that. And that way you've got 4 different elements going on in their brain to help remember that particular aspect. It would sort of help with state testing preparation. They would have more familiarity with what kind of vocabulary they could use in that state testing. You might do an assessment on each lab. You might do an assessment once a week. Say you're going to do 2 labs a week. You might do an assessment that covers both of them. If the kids have got notes on those, then it's no problem for them to go back and look at what they were talking about. And you say, well, that's sort of cheating if they can write things down and use them for their notes. We're looking at ways that we can prepare our kids similar to what other schools have. And looking something up in their notes is not a practice that they wouldn't be able to use someplace else from time to time. You might even do an assessment every 2 weeks. So you're covering maybe 4 labs or 3 labs or whatever you got finished during that period of time. Someone mentioned in the sidebar over here about Quizlet. That would be an excellent way to do an assessment, a quick assessment that covers the territory. The next bullet talks about the school or the science subjects. I know when you think about, well, I've got kids that are in the 6th grade, or I've got kids that are in the 12th grade, I've got kids that are in the 2nd semester of biology in the 10th grade. How am I going to cover all of that? You need to cover all of those subjects when you're doing labs. Now, are you going to give a full measure of what you would get in a biology class at your school during that semester? No, because you're going to have to mix it up because your kids have a mixture of different classes that they're taking. But at least we're giving them some exposure. We're helping them with vocabulary. We're helping them with assessment techniques. We're helping them be better prepared for utilizing the skills that we can give them, even if it's not a full measure like they would get in a regular class. What we're looking for is ways for them to feel comfortable going back to school. So don't do all biology, don't do all physical, don't do all chemical, but do some variety of things. Just to give you just a quick thing, I jotted down a couple of things on my notes. Simple things that don't take much energy, don't take much time, don't take much money. But you can do planting seeds, watch those seeds grow. The kids can make predictions about what's going to happen. There's all kinds of experiments about that. You can buy the little butterfly kits with the butterfly larva inside. Let those kids watch the butterflies grow. My kids love that. Release them. You can talk about the parts of the butterfly. You can talk about the stages of the butterfly development. Hundreds of things that you could do there. The frog eggs. This year in my little pond down by my yard, I found frog eggs, and so I took them up to Otter Creek, and Miss Stephanie used them as one of her science labs to talk about the frog eggs and to watch them grow into frogs. You can talk about, you can make, oh, my kids love food experiments, okay? Things like how to make ice cream, give them an explanation about why that works, to make butter, making those little crystal sticks. And so with crystals, there's hundreds of things you can talk about. Stalagmites, stalactites, ice on the road in the wintertime and why they put salt on it, and all sorts of things. You can do parts of the body. My husband happens to work at a meat processing place, and so every semester I would try to bring into Otter Creek parts of a pig, and pig is very comparable in terms of body parts to humans. And so for kids to be able to see what a liver actually looks like, they could see what the parts of the chambers of the heart look like. They could they could look at the lungs, and I would blow up the lungs, and they could see how something breathes and how that changes the way the lungs look. So all kinds of things you can do. A potato clock, my kids love that. All those things in chemicals, things where things change color or things blow up. And when I say blow up, you gotta, you know, like Mentos and Coke, that kind of thing. Fungus and mold, stomp rockets. My kids love stomp rockets. So all kinds of things that you can do that are very cheap, very easy to do. Cindy, if you'll go ahead to the next one. We talked a little bit about the scientific method. In case you need to know, those are the steps. Different people orient them different ways, and sometimes different people use different types of vocabulary for some of those. But on the KEXAC website, there are those nice little graphic organizers, nice little charts or whatever that you can utilize for the scientific method. You don't even have to come up with your own. You don't even have to look it up, except to look it up on the KEXAC website. I would suggest that you use the scientific method every experiment that you do that will possibly utilize that. I mentioned vocabulary, expand their scientific knowledge. You don't want a kid to go into class and not know what's going on. And I could compare that in my mind about me taking my car to the garage when something doesn't work and saying that my little Dumaflochet makes this little weird noise, and when I turn on the funny thing over here, this happens. They don't know what I'm talking about. And you don't want your kids to go to another school or to get a high school diploma and not know some of the vocabulary that goes with that. So it's very important that you cover the vocabulary. For instance, one of the things that I might think about is that if a kid goes into a lab someplace else other than a KEXAC school, and the teacher says, okay, everybody go get a beaker. And our kids are like, I don't know what a beaker is. We never want to put our kids in those kind of positions. They need to know the generic vocabulary that everybody else would do. I would suggest that they add that to their notebook. And there's all kinds of reasons why they need to do that. They can take that notebook with them with the vocabulary. They feel more comfortable. We never know what these kids are going to do later on in life. Some of them are going to go on to college. Some of them are going to go into fields where they would need that information, and they're never going to try that out if we don't give them the starting point for doing anything in the field of science that's hands-on. Okay, Katie, if you'll go on to the next one, please. Cost of things, lots and lots and lots of things are free. Flowers. This time of year, I always did experiments using Queen Anne's lace, those big white flat flowers that grow by the side of the road or in your field around your house. If you live in town, drive out in the country somewhere, I guarantee you'll find some on the roadside. But I did experiments with things like changing their color. So you can talk about transitioning that color and the vocabulary that goes with that, the processes of that food coloring going up into the flour, and the information that goes with that. You could do leaf collections. You could do mushrooms. Yesterday I was driving somewhere and saw one of those little fairy circles where the mushrooms form a circle. If that would have been me and I would had a class, I'd have stopped and gotten out and take a picture and talked about fairy circles and mushrooms and why they grow and what causes mushrooms to grow, where they come from, spores. If you could find any, if you could sneak one of those fairy circle things, look at the mushroom underneath. Talk about good mushrooms and bad mushrooms, things that you can eat and things that you shouldn't eat, those kinds of things. I'm sure somewhere along the way you found a bird nest. They built one in your gutter or in your porch or wherever. Talk about birds and how they construct birds' nest. I'm sure from time to time you get wasps. I saw that Cindy had a hornet's nest or a wasp nest in the eave of her house the other day. So I'm sure you got those somewhere. So there's lots and lots and lots of things out there that are free, that don't cost you anything. And when you start thinking in scientific formats, or when you think about about how to get to those things, all sorts of things will come to mind as you go. Things that you have at home, or sometimes if you have maybe at the school kitchen. If you're going to do an experiment where you've got vinegar and soda, okay, you probably have both of those things at home. If they don't, the kitchen at school might loan you that or let you have that. Obviously, they're not going to loan you soda and vinegar, but they could give it to you, I guess I should say. If you're going to do experiment with eggs, and there's hundreds of experiments that you can do with eggs. Last night I had boiled an egg for a salad, and my husband said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I saw a science experiment today on the computer, and if you take a boiled egg and you spin it fast enough, it will stand up and down." And I thought, yeah, I don't know about that, but that works. I had not tried that one. But all those kinds of things are simple. You've got it at home. It's not a big cost. You can borrow things. I'm sure that your local school that you're affiliated with would be willing to loan you a microscope if you don't have one, can't afford one. You've probably got friends that you could borrow things from. Things like if you've got a friend that makes yeast bread, borrow the starter from her. Talk about yeast. Talk about the chemical reaction that's gone into that. Talk about proofing the yeast. There's all kinds of things that you could go there. I know a couple of my teachers that I visit when I do my visitations do bees. There's all kinds of things that you could do with bees, honey, those kinds of things. You could talk about viscosity, all kinds of things that you could talk about with bees. Plants, you know, we've got plants everywhere in Kentucky. It would be easy to do a plant dissection, to talk about the parts of a plant, to talk about the propagation form of that, how they get pollen from one place to another, the different parts of a plant, all sorts of different things that you could do. If you know an electrician, he might be willing to set you up a little board that shows how you turn on the light, how the circuit works, how the Christmas tree lights work because they've got two wires, and those kinds of things. You can talk about grounding and all sorts of things with electricity. The next bullet talks about buying kits. There's hundreds of kits out there. I am not the biggest kit fan in the world, mainly because most of them are consumable. If you buy a crystal making kit, it is consumable. There's not enough stuff in there to do, you know, lots and lots and lots and lots of experiments with that. But there are some that are reusable. Obviously, things like magnets. There's tons of experiments that you can do with magnets, and those magnets obviously are reusable. They're not consumable. Some of you I've shown the little dipping bird thing where the bird waves his little head over because of the weight of the water in the bottom of his little belly and that kind of thing. Some of you I've shown the hand blower where the heat from your hand can cause the fluid to rise to the top. So there are several of those things that are not consumable. Ward Science website. Somebody's telling me over here on the side. Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Play-Doh science experiments, all of those kinds of things that you can buy refiller kits that are cheap. So all sorts of things there. So good information. Thanks for sharing. And obviously there's the KEXAC grant. Normally at the end of every year, if nothing happens drastically, then KEXAC offers grant money. It would be easy to buy bigger things like a microscope. All of your kids ought to at least know what a microscope looks like, the parts of a microscope, and have utilized it for something during their process while they're there. You can buy the ready-made slides. They're not very expensive. You can make your own auger, and you can use some examples of auger and all sorts of things that you could do under the microscope with that. You can use reusable materials, things that, you know, don't have to be consumable, and you can use cheaper consumables, obviously. Cindy, if you'll cue up my physics girl, let me talk about her just a little bit. In the resources that I've got at the end of this presentation, there are several names of people. I'll go over those and places that you can go to look for things. The physics girl is one that I find interesting. I wanted to show you this little one just so that you would understand how quick things can go. Obviously, she gives no explanation, but she does 20 science experiments in 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So let's see her do it.
So I've challenged myself to do 20 experiments in 5 minutes. That's 4 experiments per minute, which works out to about 15 seconds per experiment. I have not been able to do it in any of the dry runs, but I have hope. All of these experiments are with stuff you can find at home. You should definitely try them. Some of them require adult supervision, but they're all really fun. Okay, let's go. The first experiment is a cloud in your mouth. So you click your tongue like this, but you do it with your mouth full of air, and then you pressurize it, okay? Like this. Did you see it? Yes, I hope so. Okay, the next one we're gonna use the principle of static electricity. Rub a balloon against your hair, and then you can move water. Woo, because there's a bunch of charges in the water. It works really, really well. That is awesome. Okay, over here, I've got a hot pan. It's been heating up for a while, and I'm gonna put some water on it. And the water does not act normal. It rolls around like little balls. It's kind of like Pac-Man. The bigger ones eat the smaller ones. It's awesome. Light and frost effect. Google it. The next one, I've got a can here. I'm gonna put some safety goggles on for this one. I have a can that's been heating up for a while. There's water in it. I'm gonna turn it over into this ice water. Ah, and it crushes because of the pressure of all the atmosphere. Oh, safety goggles for the next one. This can is closed. I've got a Sharpie here, and I'm gonna just rub with some pressure along the edge over and over. Oh, until it pops open. Love that one. Okay, the next thing, we've got the land of fire over here. So we've got an experiment with a candle, a bunch of water around it. I'm gonna put this jar over that, and we're gonna wait a second to see what happens. But first, I'm gonna blow out this candle, and you can see that you can relight the flame. Oh no, I think I blew it too hard. Oh, I'm losing time. Oh, check out this one in the meantime. This one's going out, and the water level goes up because the air inside shrinks. Let's try this one again. All right, you can relight the candle. Yes, but I'm gonna put it back out with baking soda and vinegar. I'm not gonna pour the vinegar on it, but we've all done this experiment. You create a bunch of carbon dioxide bubbles when you combine baking soda and vinegar. And carbon dioxide has the benefit that it is not oxygen. So you can pour out fire. Did you see that? It didn't even look like I did anything. And the flame went out. I am losing time. Okay, the next one. If you take a tea bag, like cheap Lipton tea, whatever, dump it out, you can make these little cylinders, light them on fire, and then as they heat up, oh no! As they heat up, they get lighter and lighter, and then they start to fly because hot air loves to rise. Over here, I've got a bunch of needles pointing at this magnet, and they're all attached to strings. I'm gonna heat these up. Oh shoot, no. Okay, oh, we're still good, we got a couple. I'm gonna heat these needles up. And as I do, they're gonna lose their magnetism because they get above 2 minutes. Oh my God. they get above the temperature where metal stays magnetizable, and they, getting close on that, that's really cool. They, oh, come on, go, they fall. Yes, yes, okay. Next one, you can balance a ping pong ball on a stream of air. This is the challenge island. Right here, we've got some interlocked forks. I'm gonna take a toothpick and stick that through and use the principle of center of gravity and get the center of gravity below these balancing points. And I can balance the forks. Amazing. The next challenge, I'm gonna take this regular string and pour some water with food coloring in it from this cup, using the properties of surface tension down the string all the way to the other cup. I don't have time to do the entire cup though. You get the point. It's super cool. If I take a hard-boiled egg, not a soft-boiled egg, no. Oh my God, 1 minute, and I spin it fast enough, oh, I can get it to stand up on its end. Amazing. Okay, now take a card with a cup, turn it over. It can hold up the cup. Excellent. Next one. Polarizing sheets. You can look through them and see the properties of corn syrup and how they've got amazing optical properties. Take an Alka-Seltzer tablet, put it into some water with some oil on top, and you can make your home lava lamp. While you watch that, I'm going to take this egg and show you the property of impulse, which is that if I throw an egg, it'll get caught by something with give. But if I throw it with something with not give, someone's gonna have to clean that. Okay, and here I've got a non-Newtonian fluid. This acts like a solid, but then it'll act like a liquid as soon as I let it flow. What are we at? What are we at?
5 minutes.
Oh my gosh, 5 minutes? No! We have one experiment. We have one experiment left. One experiment left. Okay, this one uses the principle of inertia. We've got these eggs here. They want to stay exactly where they are. Okay, I have one shot at doing this. I've never actually tried this before, but I'm gonna hit it. We don't have the luxury of doing a countdown. We're just gonna go for it. Here we go. Okay. Yes! All right. Oh, thank you guys.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Okay, and if you'll flip over to the next page. But the point of me showing you the physics girl and showing you many of those experiments, many of those are in the information that's in on the KEXAC website. I've done a majority of those with my students. They're very doable. They're not expensive. They don't cost much money. But the problem with doing video things is that you notice she gave no explanation for most of them. There were a few of them she couldn't help herself and she had to explain a little bit about what happened. But for the most part, she didn't give you an explanation of things. And that's the problem with most of the video things. So if you do show video things, please embellish them with vocabulary. Please embellish them with scientific method. Please add an explanation about what's going on. Make sure that your kids have an opportunity to ask questions about why things happen. That's what science is all about. I would also suggest that you do a teacher's notebook. You can either do a hard copy or a computer version of some sort, but I would suggest that you keep a list of the things that you've done. The reason being is that if you have kids where the turnover is very quick, you can utilize those same materials and those same experiments again when the kids have gone through their routine of changing out with you. But at the same time, it also gives you an idea of a place to write down what worked and what didn't work, what took more time than you wanted to do. You might include how much time it cost you at class. So those kinds of things. So keep track of those. It also helps you to divide your categories. I would suggest that you balance out or try to balance out as much as you can, the chemical, the biological, the physical, so that you're not doing all the same thing, and keeping a list of them will help you remember and help you sort of see in your head that you're not doing all of the same thing, but break it up so that you're meeting the needs of all of your kids. I would suggest that you keep a copy of some form or fashion of the directions, about the materials needed, about an explanation about why it worked or why it didn't work. And maybe you're smarter than I am in terms of probably are smarter than I am, but sometimes I would have to think, oh gosh, I better go back and look up the terminology that went with that, because I didn't remember from one year to the next what the terminology was with that particular experiment. I would suggest that you take notes, things that you have to do earlier up front, like the stomp rockets. If you do stomp rockets, and I know that sounds silly, but my kids love stomp rockets, and I got the idea from watching my granddaughter's kindergarten class do stomp rockets. But you're going to have to collect some empty drink bottles to go with your launcher, so you'll need to do that up front. So think about things that you have to do up front, and if you take yourself some notes from that, then it will be easier for you to keep up with. Just some suggestions. As I mentioned, and Cindy added the page link, but on the KEXAC website, we have, as I said, about 150 experiments. I did little snippets of things just to give you an idea about what it would look like, about what the materials look like, what the finished product might look like, but it in no means does the vocabulary. It doesn't do the scientific method. It was not intended to. My intention when I did those videos was to show you that they are doable, that you don't have to have anything fancy to be able to do them. And by the way, I'll give you my videographer was not a professional, and nor am I a professional, so you will see some glitches in it and some bad photography, but you'll get the principle, or you'll get the idea. The information on the website that gives all of the information about, like how much soda to put, how much yeast to put, how much whatever it is that you're going to do, all those kinds of things are on the website as well. It's under a little thing called Full Science Resource Compilation. And it's so large that Katie and Cindy about died when I sent it to them. You will have to download it. It won't let you load it all at one time, but you'll have to download it. I might download it, print out some of the things that I wanted that time until I got my collection of things that I wanted, or copy them so that you can utilize them in some form or fashion at a later date. Okay, next one. I would suggest accumulating some kind of Katie, if we go to the next slide, if you'll accumulate something to store things in, just some boxes, some tote boxes, whatever you want to do, but it helps you organize things so that you've got them all in an accumulated form or fashion. Sometimes I would put things together in Ziploc bags and put them in my storage container. For instance, I did a session on nuts, and we talked about hickory nuts and acorns and all kinds of different nuts. Many kids wanted to, when you talked about what kind of tree they came from, they didn't know that there wasn't an acorn tree. And so those are kinds of things that we don't want our kids to be embarrassed by not knowing. But I also let them eat different kinds of nuts, assuming that they did not have any kind of allergy to nuts. But I would go to Kroger. They have little sections in big Krogers that will let you buy small amounts of nuts. And I would let them try out different flavors of nuts if they wanted to give them an idea about an opportunity to eat something that they had never eaten. Also, things that we have not talked about when I've talked about science before is I've not talked about things that we probably need to include that I had not emphasized before. But we need to talk about lab safety with our kids, about equipment so that they know the names, especially what microscope parts are and how to use one. They need to know about good lab practices, like when that girl the physics girl in the video was lighting that candle and you could see her hair, and I don't know how much distance there was between that match and her hair, but it didn't look like much. That's not a good lab practice. She should have had her hair pulled back. Dissections, plant and animal, your kids need to be exposed to all of those. So in the resources that follow, I gave you some sites that you can get information from those for, so you don't even have to look up the websites for those. There's thousands of websites out there, and so to keep you from having to filter through all of them, these are some that I thought were good, and I'll show you those as we go through the rest of the slides. But those are things that we need to include, because when your kids go to a regular school, they need to know what the eye wash station is. You know, they don't need to be surprised by things like that they've never had experience with. Okay, Katie, if you'll go, or Cindy, if you'll go on to the next one. So I wanted to give you some resources. The list here is of people that you can find videos of, things like the Steve Spangler thing. But all of these people will have videos that you can watch and you can utilize. You can even show to your kids if you want to embellish them with the other things that you need to do, like why it works, the vocabulary, the scientific method. But these are all people that you can see cute little videos from. And most of them are on TV, so you're going to get big productions, like one of them that I watched the other day. They shot 3,000 ping pong balls into the audience. So they do things because it's on TV for big impact. So that might be something that would be interesting to your kids if you'll embellish it with the things that you need. Okay, on to the next page. Pinterest has millions of things on there. If you're interested in, if you don't want to fool with looking them up yourself, you can follow my page. If you're not a Pinterest fan, get somebody to show you how to use Pinterest, but you can follow someone else. It's under my husband's name, which is Gordon Shear. I have gobs of different little boxes, but if you look under science, it will show you hundreds of different experiments there. There's a couple of other people there, a couple of other places. One new one that I had not seen was that physics, which is spelled funny, education. They had 150 science experiments, free, again, videos that you could watch, but they were all accumulated together. Anytime you can find 150 of something in one place is a good resource for me. If you'll go on to the next one, Cindy. So these are some other people, some other places, like the Crazy Russian. He does some really cool things. He speaks obviously with a very thick accent. He doesn't give much of an explanation, but all of those things are places that you can go. YouTube, you can do almost anything on. If you've got a subject that you want to look up, you can look it up and find. Again, you'll probably have to Google the explanation because most of them don't do explanations. I will also say that if you Google KEXAC YouTube, it'll have a video section, and all of those little short snippets of videos that I've done for science are on there. They don't have any pictures or anything, and it will say something like, I don't remember the exact words, it's on something about science on it. Anyway, it'll make sense if you go to the KEXAC YouTube, which is their own little site. Then the resources that are on the next page and the following page then, it's important to do dissection. Your kids don't need to be totally illiterate of doing dissections. I know you can't do that in school. I wouldn't even attempt that in school in any form or fashion. So I gave you a few things there. I gave you 3 dissections that are, in my opinion, pretty nice dissection videos that they could watch, particularly if they are upperclassmen, where they would be doing dissections in their biology classes. I even gave you the amount of minutes that are involved at the end. The next page then, Cindy. The same kind of thing. I've included the science labs, some resources there, microscope, how to use the microscope. Lots of colleges will give a microscope explanation before those kids come to lab class in their college, because every microscope is different. So they give you some basics there. So some options there, some things about microscope parts and focus. There's a video there. Okay, then that leads me to my last slide, and obviously I've not left much room for questions, so I apologize for that. But the last page, you can do this, all right? If you need any help in any way, contact me. My contact information is in the KEXAC website. Email me. I send emails out sometimes. You can get my address from there, but it's in the KEXAC book as well. Your students need to have a comparable background to their peers, and this is the way to do it in terms of science. You can do this. And that last little thing, we don't have time to watch, I don't think, but the last little thing has 5 science experiments for the first day of school or something. But anyway, I'd put it on there thinking we might have time to watch it, but I don't think we do. Do you have any quick questions? I really appreciate you hanging with me today. Hopefully I've given you some ideas about things that you can use. This is something that we can do as KEXAC schools. Anything else?
I'm not seeing any questions. Hold on just a second. No, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. If nobody has any, I would just like to say thank you again, Peggy, for doing this session with us. A lot of great information, a lot of great resources.
So how can they get those resources? Somebody said, can they get a copy of the presentation? Because obviously it has those links. So how can we do that, Cindy? Can we put that on Google or?
Let me find the link that I've been sharing on all my other meetings. Hold on just a second.
And then you can just copy this link and it's got those resources in there.
Well, if I can find it, I will share it with you.
And if for some reason that doesn't work, if you'll email me, I will send it to you. Because I'd like for you to have those resources.
Okay. I am copying the Google Drive to our resources right now in the chat, so you can have that link, and it will have Peggy's presentation with all those links in that side there. So there you go.
Good luck, and I expect to see some great science things going on in your schools when I visit.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you, Peggy.
Have a great year.